I'm Jessica Ann Bogart for Audio Story Time. Today's story is an odd mix of fan fiction and faux fiction, which is the opposite of fan fiction. The subject of this tug-of-war is Star Wars.
Welcome to
Audio
Story.
May the Force be clobbered!
Hi, this is Emeth. I'm going to read the fight between Emperor Sheev Alderaan and Ocean Elf. It takes place shortly after the Judgment Incident. Although Ocean and the Star Wars nut had role-played and discussed various things that make up this section, it is written entirely by Ocean. Here goes. Part 10. The Argument. In her room, Elf rummaged in her jacket pocket and took out her business card holder, removed a few cards, put them on a dresser, and put the holder back. There was a knock at the door. "Miss Elf!" Sheev called. "Oh, crap," the elf muttered under her breath. "Ocean Elf?" Another knock followed. Elf sighed and dejectedly approached the door. "Yes," she said when opening it. "May I come in for a moment?" Sheev asked. "If you like." The elf responded uncertainly and withdrew to let him in. Sheev noticed the suitcase on the bed and a few things that still needed to be packed lying next to it. He took a seat in a chair against a wall. "What's troubling you, Ocean Elf?" She stiffened. "Please talk to me," he said gently. "I don't bite." That earned him a slight grin and barely audible chuckle from the elf. "What is it?" he asked. Elf took a deep breath. "It's the little girl who arrived today. I think she's being used in a coercion scheme." "How so?" Sheev asked. "How she got here and why?" Elf responded as she resumed packing her things. "It's just a bit too coincidental." "Go ahead, please," he encouraged. She said she was terrified. "Well, I know how it feels being suddenly whooshed against your will and beyond your control to somewhere else. That's exactly what happened to me when Anakin summoned me here several days ago. So I wouldn't put it past him to do that again, this time with a little girl. For what reason I don't know and don't care to find out. But that the one person she kept demanding to see when she arrived was him, I don't like it. Yes, this is something else we will be looking into. But what I found out for why Anakin brought you here was because he tried to reach out and communicate, and never got any answer from your world. No communications reached our HQ from him. I wouldn't answer even if they did." "Why is that?" Sheev asked. The elf sighed. "It's too much to get into now," she said. "Well, be that as it may," Sheev said, "it is also true that there's a high risk of communication failures at such great distances, but that is ultimately why he resorted to this." The elf frowned. "Okay, understood, but not excused," she finally said. "If he has done the same thing with the little girl as a means for him to get me to stick around for her sake so he can try to win me over as a friend or something more serious," she said with a grimace, "he can put that idea out of his mind permanently." Sheev looked surprised for a moment, then dismayed. He and Ben knew that Anakin might have had hopes for something like that, but now these frequent events helped the elf figure that all out so soon. Sheev tried to appeal to the memory of what compassionate moments had transpired in the past few days. "Are you sure you want to throw all that away, after all that's happened, after all he went through?" The elf sighed in annoyance. Sheev continued. "After all you did for him?" Elf slapped the suitcase shut. "No," she said, frowning. "After all I did to stop an evil slime mold from committing more sadistic, heinous stuff. I didn't do it for him. He brought me here, told me what was going on, and things went from there. You're the first woman outside his own family who wept over what painful treatment he had to go through for more than 3 decades, said Sheev. The elf flushed. "Who told you that?" Her voice became stern with indignation. "I would have been just as upset over some sand person undergoing that for the same length of time. Though whether that's actually what went on is anybody's guess. That was not affection for Anakin Vader. It was sheer horror. How many others were denied treatment under Palpatine? And that was a system Vader is just as guilty for running. I don't believe his skin graft stories and doubt that screaming I heard from the medical center was anything more than a very good act unless—" And here she trailed off, expression darkening. "Unless he or Sidious was actually torturing someone else?" "No, it was Anakin," Sheev said. "If it had been someone else, Ben would have picked that up through the Force." The ocean elf looked skeptical. There was a tense silence, and then Sheev finally said quietly, "I see." Ocean continued. And don't get me started on that whole business about you having to judge this little girl as worthy to meet Anakin. Just who in the world does he think he is anyway? The nerve. Elf, Sheev said. That is just a measure to make sure of safety. Oh, please. The elf stormed. The new emperor suddenly became stern but gravely calm. He stared at the elf intently. Shout like that again, he warned, and I will banish you. The elf glared at him. As if that would be a punishment, she growled. She took a step toward him and said menacingly, I was brought here against my will. I will not be sent away against my will. Like it or not, you are stuck with me until I say otherwise. Ocean elf, may I remind you that I am emperor here? He fired back. Okay, I can play that game too, she said coolly, and winced at the prospect. May I remind you that I'm an elf, who gets called Ocean for a reason. Anyway, you should be reminding Vader who you are. You wouldn't, he said. Threaten banishment again, and I could deluge your dwelling until there is nothing left. The Emperor shuddered, and then said, This isn't getting us anywhere. Then he continued with the previous explanation. Palpatine just left everything open so anyone could come in and raid or otherwise make trouble, he explained. Or zap strangers in from galaxies away without their consent, or even so much as a warning beforehand, and mess with their emotions to make them comply. I can see where that would be very upsetting, he said. No, I don't think you do, said the elf. That's just lip service. All you care about is Anakin. Now, Ocean, that's judging a little girl as worthy to meet Anakin doesn't sound like a safety measure. At all, she steamed. Ocean, Sheev began again. Even a child with the power of the Force and an ill will could do serious damage, and with Palpatine being so recently destroyed, we were just making sure the girl bore no ill will toward Anakin. Ah, yes, because it's really all about Anakin. Never mind the rest of the galaxy, let's all orbit around freaking Anakin, the elf snarled. Banish me if you like, when you've been sworn in. I'll be long gone by then, and don't plan on coming back as long as everyone keeps carrying on about Anakin. Now, Ocean, that isn't fair, said Sheev. Exactly, she said. I meant what you're saying isn't fair, he said. Oh, but it's accurate from where I see it, she countered. Ever since I got here, it was Anakin this, Anakin that, Anakin and his suit, Anakin and his past, Anakin and his pain, and just when I finally thought that was all over and we were going to start focusing on getting you installed as the new emperor, this new girl shows up, and all of a sudden it's got to make sure she's worthy to meet Anakin. Even she was whimpering desperately like some lovesick puppy to see him. That was already back in training before we saw her up the stairs into your room for that freak judgment thing. Gah! Makes me sick! She wasn't shouting, but the dislike was clear in the clipped and hissing consonants and frosty tone of voice. She couldn't have looked more disgusted. The Emperor took a deep breath and pondered carefully about what to say next. What we're really doing with this screening process is guarding against threats. But that doesn't make any sense, said the elf. If you're trying to keep travelers and newcomers safe here, you don't do that by judging them, let alone as worthy to meet some person. That's what I mean. This sounds more like a measure to protect Anakin, and put him up on some pedestal than keep tourists and immigrants safe. It's not as if your precious Anakin is a saint. Sheev looked disheartened. He knew he was backing the wrong person, but he was too afraid not to. The elf continued. He had everyone running circles around him ever since I had the misfortune to be brought here by him. And back when he was proudly going by the name Darth Vader, he freaking kidnapped and tortured his own daughter. Yes, I'm aware he might not have known about her relation to him yet, but I don't care. It was despicable. Then he tortured another guy who was working against the dark side, and many other people many times over, and it doesn't matter how long ago that was. He didn't just haul off and slug somebody in a fit of anger. He actually committed deliberate prolonged torture. Sheev looked as if he was waging a gargantuan inner struggle with himself. Finally, he tried to get the elf to back down by saying, "But that was before, when he was still known as Darth Vader." "I don't care," the elf shot back savagely. "He's still Darth Vader as far as I'm concerned. Even before he took that name, he was a jealous, violent maniac. He choked Padme's former lover to death in front of her to police her behavior. He choked her in a rage while she was pregnant." There was a silence. Sheev looked horrified. He disdained domestic abuse and torture as well, so this was news to him. "Yes, I've done my homework. So if you are still puzzled about why I hate this guy, I hope this clears it up." Unable to come up with an answer that would both satisfy Ocean and keep himself out of possible trouble with Anakin, whom he actually feared, he chose to stick to the subject of the flawed judgment policy. He conceded, "I have to agree with you on that judgment policy. It doesn't make sense the way it's set up now. We were in such a hurry to put a measure into place when the child arrived so unexpectedly that I had no time to think it through. I'll do what I can to get this measure revised and reworded so no innocent little child has to go through that again. And I did try to reassure her during the process. But you might as well know that Anakin is strong with the Force, and he used it on me today. There were a couple of times when I whispered something to the little girl to comfort her, and I felt myself starting to choke." The elf looked livid. "I won't mince words. I want him gone," she said ominously. Then she stopped glowering and said more gently, "I wish most of you and Felicity all the best, but I will be contacting Mission HQ on Earth to see if we can locate her family. If so, I will see she is reunited with them. No questions asked." And she added with emphasis, "Measures will be put in place to prevent Anakin from ever getting near her. And Vader gets absolutely no say in this." "But if she doesn't have family," said the Emperor, "I'm sure you'd want her to be placed with another, including that she has a mother and father. But if not—" His opening to attempt persuading the elf to start giving in to Anakin's agenda concerning her. "Of course," said the elf, "but it will never be Daddy Anakin and Mommy Osi, never," she said, doing up her jacket to go. "Never's a long time," said Sheev. "What if you two were the only two adults on this planet? I do not ponder such hypotheticals. If that was the case, I would take her to my home world and see about finding her an adoptive home. Besides, maybe the little girl already has parents. If not, surely there are other people around who would give a loving home to this child. Try looking beyond Anakin for once." Sheev sighed. This is going to break his heart. At her wit's end, Elf's expression hardened. "That's too damn bad," she said tersely. "Ocean Elf," Sheev said with a stern edge returning to his tone, "I may not be officially Emperor yet, but you watch your language when talking to me." "I'll rephrase," she said coolly. "That's too darn bad. Look, I realize he's probably wanting for some female companionship since he caused his wife to die of a broken heart by turning to the dark side. And don't give me all those worn-out excuses about how he did that to save her, etc., etc. It adds up to epic fail all around. The fact is that companionship is not going to come from me, not now, not in the near future, not in the foreseeable or unforeseeable future, not ever." "He must have had such high hopes," said Sheev. "Not since his late wife Padme has a woman come along and—" "Yes, well, his hopes that I was supposed to help him attain were met. He is healed now. He no longer requires the suit. I did what was originally expected, nothing more, nothing less. Anakin doesn't owe me anything but his absence, and I don't owe him a—" She checked herself just in time to avoid another language admonishment. Freaking thing. Sheev got the idea to feel Elf out a little, and hopefully take the focus off Anakin. It might buy him some time, even if it got her goat. At this point, Sheev was desperate to escape Vader's anger. "Elf," he speculated, "I can't be sure if what I'm hearing from you is jealousy or contempt." "At this point," the elf countered, rolling her eyes, "I can't tell if you're as blind as everyone else or just nuts. The only one who might be jealous of Anakin is dear old Palpitations Insidious or some other sadistic slimeball." "Point taken," Sheev responded. Sheev winced, getting exhausted, and only hoped Vader wouldn't take his anger out on him if he couldn't get the elf to change her mind. Ocean continued, still in frigid tones. "He and I don't have anything in common and never will. His supersonic hearing creeps me out. I don't want to stick around where somebody can hear what I say or what I eat and drink from who knows where else in the building. I'm not even remotely attracted to him. Anakin getting any idea after only a few days that he and I could be an item is repulsive and insanity off the charts." Then her voice became threatening. "And if he ever manages to put me somewhere against my will again, he will regret it, as the very last thing he ever does." Sheev looked horrified. He did not dare to say anything, but, "You surely don't mean that." "I mean it," the elf said in a quiet but menacing tone that was nearly a whisper. "If it were not for getting myself into loads of trouble with you lot, I could have annihilated him right along with that last version of Mr. Insidious. I just want him out of my life, and hope this is a strong enough hint. And I would prefer if he went out of Felicity's too." There was a punishing silence. Sheev frowned, troubled. He knew what he had to do in order to avoid Anakin's wrath, even if it meant going against his own conscience this time. He dare not confide in Elf what the problem was, and risk suffering more Force-induced agony from Anakin Vader. He would rather risk angering the elf. Sheev finally collected himself. At length, he said calmly but decisively, "Ocean, I now relieve you of your duties here." The elf narrowed her eyes accusingly at him. "It's clear whose side you're on. You didn't hire me, so you can't fire me. I quit." She spat coldly. "Must you always have the last word?" Sheev asked, becoming vexed. "You're hardly the first to point that out," she said stoically. "That does not surprise me," said Sheev, throwing his hands up in a show of vexation. Ocean didn't even seem to notice that last remark. "Bottom line is there will never be an Anakin and me. No matter how many crocodile tears he cries over it or how many people he gets to run interference for him." Sheev looked crestfallen. So she had figured it all out, and his failure to move her would surely result in some horrible consequences from the newly healed and strengthened man who brought about this whole situation. "I've had it!" Ocean ranted. "I'm done! And trust me on this one, it would not be good for anyone if I was forced to stay here and fulfill some role out of obligation. I've got a family and friends back home. Not that Anakin wants you or anyone else taking a little thing like that into consideration, so I'm off." "Elf, don't do this, don't leave this way, let's talk it over," said Sheev. "There is nothing left to say. Look," the elf indicated the dresser. "I've got these business cards, one for Leia, Obi-Wan, and Yoda. If you want to stay in touch, you can copy the information. But not Anakin." "But surely," Sheev said, troubled by something she said earlier, "you didn't actually mean you'd make good on that threat if summoned again. Tell me you don't mean that literally." "Nobody is ever going to get away with that again," Ocean said sharply. "Suppose I got spirited away and couldn't get back. That actually happened when Vader kidnapped me. The first place he put me was no teleport zone. I was relieved to find another area that let me come and go. But suppose I couldn't, and something happened to one of my family while I was here." The elf sounded and looked on the verge of tears, but fought them back with a vicious bluster, continuing, "I'm holding Anakin personally responsible," she hissed. "I realize this must have shaken you terribly, but I don't know how to break this to Anakin," Sheev said. The elf glared. "Anakin schmanakin," she snarled contemptuously. "He's a big boy, he'll survive. Just tell him to forget I even exist, unless he's already overheard. The others are welcome to contact me, but not on his behalf." Her glare mellowed into a steely, determined gaze as she looked at Sheev. "He is not the new emperor. You are." "Ocean," he said, still trying to avoid more forced torture from Vader. "I feel as if I owe him, to make up for the things the last emperor did." "You don't," she replied. "The debt Palpatine owes to every citizen he, and Vader and that lot harmed, simply can't be repaid. You can only forge ahead and be the best emperor you can be to all citizens. That's sound advice. Will you take mine? Go home, make sure your loved ones are all right, then get yourself some rest. Forget about Anakin Skywalker, then come back when you feel up to it. You'll always be welcome to visit," said the Emperor. "Gladly," the elf said. "But you threatened banishment, so I will not be back." She gave him an ice-cold glance. "Goodbye, sir." With that, she disappeared. Once this section was written, the Anakin fan nut smugly said,
"Ocean Elf won't be coming back for a long time,"
making it crystal clear she'd rather do Anakin's stuff, and she wanted desperately to believe Ocean would be fine with that. Ugh, how sickening is that?
I remember that too. I was screaming inside my head at that Anakin sycophant, and so relieved when Ocean threatened to stop the story and roleplay altogether. From what I witnessed, that Star Wars fanatic was so pushy and grating, and she thought everything was wonderful because she was having a ball. But her Vader fawning was tiresome, and I could tell Ocean definitely wasn't enjoying herself.
The Star Wars fan was actually gloating over the idea of Sheev sacking Ocean. It was she who came up with that line about relieving Ocean of her duties.
What duties? The only useful thing Ocean got to do over there was help Sheev to revive Shmi, who had to be faded out in a revision to eventually wrap things up permanently.
It got worse. Just after this section was originally written, they actually bandied about the idea of bringing in a new girl to replace Ocean, a woman who would be sympathetic to Vader, possibly a love interest. But Ocean was never serious about this. She just wanted to feel the Star Wars nut out to see how excited she got about it.
Let me guess. The Star Wars girl's heart got all aflutter, and she was totally gung-ho about that idea.
That's exactly what happened, but Ocean proposed just quitting the whole thing instead.
People who collaborate on writing or roleplay should enjoy themselves, and that means being on the same page. If they don't want the same things out of a story, maybe they shouldn't collaborate. Why should Ocean have to put up with being made to participate in a story she hates because a sad, delusional fangirl wants to waste her time and everybody else is on snogging and puffing up a Dark Lord? I'm glad that when push came to shove, Ocean decided that if anyone was gonna go, it was Anakin, the biggest, most angsty, bratty, Gary stew ever.
Yes? Ocean only allowed all that Anakin stuff in because she wanted to see how far the fangirl would go. When the Star Wars nut showed she was more than willing to dump Ocean out of the story for Anakin, Ocean was fully prepared to yank the whole thing. Isn't there a little more to this story section?
Ah, yes, there is. Shaking his head dejectedly, Sheev slowly left the room and went on his way. He had put on a good front and avoided Vader's wrath for now, but he hadn't actually expected the elf to leave the planet. Now that she was gone, Sheev knew that he was now at Vader's mercy. They all were. If only the elf had simply thrown Sheev out of her room instead and confronted Vader later, maybe everyone would have had a chance at freeing themselves from the strange hold Vader had over them. Yet Sheev, like the others, still felt a bizarre kind of sympathy for him, and he couldn't figure out why. But there was one thing he could try to put right, and that was to make up for what happened before his fight with the elf. So he went looking for little Felicity. He tried so hard to reassure Felicity that he was not a frightening individual, and he had to inform the others that Ocean Elf had left. Back on Earth, Cosima and Amay were about to call it a slow work day at Mission HQ when a door was roughly opened and slammed. The closet door was subjected to the same treatment, and the coat hangers were violently jangled. Neither fairy had the chance to get up and go see who it was. A furious elf stalked into the room. "Welcome back. What happened?" asked Cosima. "Guys, I'm really sorry about this. You all must have been worried sick. It wasn't my idea to go in the first place, let alone be away this long," Elf said quickly. "What happened?" Cosima repeated. "Are you okay?" The elf huffed and seemed to clam up. "No, I'm not," she said. A few moments later, she picked up the phone and dialed. There were a few minutes of emotional conversation with first her dad, then her mom, and then she hung up, heaving a big sigh. "Thank goodness everybody's all right," she said, looking much better for a few moments. "Do you want to talk about it, Elf?" Amay asked. The elf shook her head. "I'm just glad everyone back here is all right, and this will never happen again." "What?" Amay persisted. The elf looked livid. "Only the most exasperating, spirit-crushing ignominy of a trip I never asked to go on. Nobody gets away with that," she fumed. "Who was it?" asked Cosima. Elf shook her head. "It's just too insulting to go into detail. Nearly a week out of my life that I'll never get back," she huffed. "But we're going to take care of something right now. I want this property and area surrounding it secured, so no one can set up portals and grab people from here against their will ever again." She worked with Amay and Cosima to put those measures in place. Once Elf subsided, she went all around the HQ building and methodically put away all Star Wars items she could find. Since they didn't belong to any one person, they were spared the destruction they would have gotten if they had been exclusively her possessions. But she did not want to see anything about that would remind her of the worst and most insulting failure of a trip she never consented to in the first place. Having finally done that, she went to bed and eventually drifted off to sleep.